Over the years, I have conducted more than 100 tech interviews, and there is one question I always start with, and unfortunately, majority of candidates fail to answer. Now imagine the situation when we have two candidates for the job. The first candidate comes into a technical job interview. We say hello, we do some chit-chatting, maybe I will ask tell me about your previous experience, what technologies did you use, on what projects have you worked, and then I ask him one of my favorite questions to begin with. Could you please draw me an architecture diagram for your previous project? If it's a physical on-site in the office interview, I ask him to use whiteboard. But if it's online, like via Zoom or Teams, like during the COVID times, I ask him to share the screen and use the tool of his choice. Some of the candidates uses tools like Paint, while others more powerful tools like Eraser.io. Let's say the project the candidates worked on previously was e-commerce platform. So the first candidate starts to draw. Maybe he starts from a user. Let's maybe make a little bit bigger. Then he starts to draw some rectangulars. Let's say he says, yeah, I worked on the front end. Our front end was communicating with the back end. So let's say back end. And the data was saved in the database. So let's say he draws some database. Let's make it a little bit bigger as well. So the backend is saving the data into the database and is retrieving the data from the database. And of course, the users are coming to our front end. Once the diagram was finished by the candidate, I always like to ask him, so you had some users, you had the front end for e-commerce site, you had your backend database. So on which of those parts have you worked yourself? So then he says well, I mostly was working on, let's say, the front end, right? Well, technically, the first candidate is not wrong at all. They do have users, the users go to the front end is communicating with the backend, and the backend is saving and reading data from the database. But it's very high level. The second candidate comes into interview, and I ask him the very same question. Could you please draw me an architectural diagram of your previous project? And by the way, the project he worked on was the exact same e-commerce platform. So he goes to the whiteboard and maybe as well starts from the user. So let's just grab that. Then he starts drawing some boxes. So the same, let's say, front end. He starts explaining that at first users comes to the front end. Then he starts talking about microservices. So let's say, for example, there is a orders microservice. The orders microservice has its own database. So let's pick that one. The orders information are stored and retrieved from this database. The communication between the front end and the order service is not happening directly. There is as well some API gateway. So let's do this one. So at first, the requests goes to the front end, to the API gateway, and from the API gateway to the order service. So there is a orders microservice, but there is as well some other microservices, for example, products service, which again has its own separate database. The communication happens through the API gateway. Then he mentions something that, for example, the product service was struggling with the performance, so maybe they introduced, for example, Redis. So let's put Redis right here. So the Redis cache was used for the product service. The product service was using also the S3 bucket for storing the pictures of the products. So let's do like that. Then he starts talking about the payment part. So maybe they used, for example, Stripe. So let's say Stripe. And the Stripe was used through the order service. And once he's done with the diagram, I ask him the same question. So on which of these have you worked on personally? And let's say he was working on the same front end only. Can you tell a difference between these two diagrams? They both are about the same project. But the first one is very simplified, only like front-end, back-end, and database. The other one has a lot more in it. It has like front-end, API gateway, Redis, S3, product services, microservices, Stripe, etc. Even though both candidates worked only on the front-end, but the first one was not aware about how things are connected, what the overall picture of the project looks like. It shows that the second candidate has a much broader overview of the system, even though he worked on the front-end, but he knows about all the parts. Understanding and effectively communicating the architecture of a software project is a crucial skill for a software engineer, especially in the more senior roles. This ability goes beyond just showcasing a technical expertise. It reflects a deeper understanding of a software project intricacies, the broader context of a system, and how different components interact with each other. So my honest advice for you is, before your next job interview, please prepare to talk about your previous project and practice how to draw an architectural diagram for it. And if you are already a master of drawing architectural diagrams, you can press here to practice some JavaScript questions. Hit that subscribe button if you like this video, and thank you for watching. See you on the next one.